Welcome back to another episode of Breakthrough, a Dale Carnegie podcast. I'm Neville DeLucia, the co-host. I'm actually riding solo today, and I'm delighted to be hosting Dr. Emily King. She's a child psychologist, former school psychologist, and she provides parent consultation to those that have neurodivergent children and teens. She also provides education opportunities to parents as well as educators to guide us. And when I first met Dr. Emily, I came in late for a meeting, and it was so clear that she has a genuine love and passion for what she does and what she's doing in the community. So Dr. Emily, please, man, just share with us, just how did you come to being and doing what you're doing right now? Where did that love and passion come from for your chosen career path?
Well, thank you first for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I first and foremost, when I was a little girl, wanted to be a teacher, and that has evolved over time in many different ways. I set my sights on being an English teacher because that's what my mom was. That's kind of how I fell into I love literature, and I fell into getting a bachelor's in English along the way because of that. But then I discovered all the different struggles kids have with learning. And that led me to my path in school psychology, and where education and psychology merged.
Yeah.
And over time, just started working with younger kids, and also, of course, more neurodivergent brains, and how different learning styles does not always fit our standardized education system. And we have a lot of great things in place to support students, but we are always learning and can always do more to help lift up and normalize all the neurodiversity among humans and among students.
Yeah.
So along that path, I've worked in schools. I ended up in private practice because I'm able to, do more things and expand beyond just working with evaluations and testing, as many school psychologists do. And then lately I've circled back to teaching and circled back to really trying to help teachers and parents understand how kids are learning, because I can bring kids to a certain extent as far as I can, and through educating them about the brain, educating them about their emotions, but it's the relationships in their life, their teachers, their parents, and eventually their peers and their coworkers that really need to better understand them, and then helping kids advocate for themselves in these situations that, school is just a little microcosm for work and higher ed and work, and helping all of us just get along and understand each other better.
And that's that's what we do as well, right? Those relationships are so critical, and I love that you mentioned the relationship side of things. One of my staff members in South Africa has a child with Asperger's, and what I really admired about her was that she's very on hands with her kid, her son. She's very transparent. Her son goes to school, a normal school. I say a normal school in inverted commas, but she was very open with the educators and the support that she needed to give. And I really admired that about her. And when things went wrong at school, she was very proactive getting back into the school to show that she's supporting her child, but also showing that she's there for the parent and that for the educator. And that relationship, she says, was so critical for her child, again, normalizing into that process. Yeah. So I'm just thinking, neurodivergent is a term that is so broad. So maybe for our audience, and just knowing that our audience is young adults, high school, college, educators, and parents, right? So for those that maybe aren't quite sure what neurodivergent is, maybe just give us a 40-second synopsis of what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we're all pretty familiar that we have, diagnoses that we can get support with, either outside of school or from medical doctors, or also inside school. But over time, it's becoming increasingly clear that as a population, we are all neurodiverse. So when we talk in general about, everyone has a different wiring. In years past, this was, I'm a visual learner, or I'm an auditory learner, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert, and that's all still true. But when we really learn more about neuroscience, it's coming down to, we are all neurodiverse. And then some of us are neurodivergent, which means that we've reached a diagnostic threshold of something being identified as a specific need that needs to be supported for us to access our classroom, our job, our relationships, or needs support. So things like autism would fall under the neurodivergence umbrella, ADHD, learning disabilities, and also twice exceptionality, which is when you're identified with giftedness and ADHD or a learning disability. And so many individuals who identify as neurodivergent have very asynchronous skills. And this is where it gets tricky, because you can meet someone who's highly creative, but they can't remember to be on, or they can't be on time anywhere they go. And so that's very common in ADHD. And so intelligence is separate from some of these skill weaknesses we have in potentially like anxiety or executive functioning. And so it's that asynchronicity of skills that's important for everyone to understand.
And I think you're saying something that's really important here, Dr. Emily, where you're saying intelligence is totally separate, right? And if you think about, we look at maybe our children, or we look at, as an educator, maybe the person in the room, we might see that potential, but maybe their friends don't, and the friends are teasing them, maybe hazing, or maybe the parent doesn't understand that, right? So just from a if I could ask, maybe give some advice. What advice do we have for parents?
Yeah.
For maybe the educators, and certainly for friends, right? That have friends in that neurodivergent, I forget the word you used, that aren't maybe neurotypical, if I could call it.
Right. So this is really true for all of those populations that you just mentioned: teachers, parents, peers. The first thing to know is to not make assumptions. So if you see someone struggling with something, that doesn't mean that they're struggling with everything. That means they're struggling with the thing that they're struggling with right in front of you. Same with things that are strengths, because this is where we get tripped up. Like, oh, that guy's so creative, he must be good at everything. None of us are good at everything, right? So making assumptions one way or the other can really set us up for disappointment or confusion or misunderstanding. And where bullying comes from, where teasing comes from, is not understanding another peer, feeling uncomfortable about it, and then not having the social or emotional maturity to stay curious, right? It's hard for adults to stay curious. So not making assumptions, staying curious, and leaning into that. Why is my kid having a hard time? Why is my student having a hard time? Even though what's so tricky about this is lots of big emotions come out as behaviors, or times where a kid might seem rude, and that gives us feelings.
But those behaviors are often, or could come from a source of frustration, right? So
yes, right. So I often say to teachers and parents, let's figure out why kids are having a hard time, not assuming they're giving us a hard time. Because so much about neurodivergence is and accepting and staying curious about neurodivergence is understanding these are skill weaknesses, even though they're coming across potentially as an intentional rub on you to make your day terrible. That's usually not what's happening. And if we can just get curious about why someone is late to a meeting, or why someone, has asked us that question 3 times, we might want to say, hey, I've noticed that you've asked me this question 3 times. Is there a better way I could communicate that to you? And this is where self-advocacy and that curiosity from a coworker or a classmate or a parent teacher meets. So we've got to, at the same time, we help everybody else in the world understand neurodiversity and neurodivergence. We're helping kids and teens and young adults who identify as neurodivergent understand themselves, accept it, be okay with it, doesn't define you, but is absolutely part of how you function. And then communicate that in a way that be like, you know what? I need you to email this to me, because if you tell me verbally at the water cooler, I'm going to have to ask you 3 more times.
Yeah, because
So
on the way
simple
back,
stuff
I'm
like
meeting
that.
someone. On the way back, I'm meeting someone, and that's out of my head, right? It's like,
Out of my head, it's gone. Yeah. And by the time you're a young adult, you know what works and doesn't work for you. You
but
know
sometimes
that,
you-
your parent asked you to do
Yeah.
3 things. And by the time you left the room, it was gone. So usually by the time you're a teen and young adult, if you have executive functioning weaknesses, which is really common with autism, ADHD, and sometimes anxiety, if you're just, thinking about something else and not attending, you usually have some strategies already. And it's normalizing that, normalizing, hey, I figured out my system of doing things. I figured out what works for me. And I, hope that we can, just as a culture, normalize this a little more, even in job interviews,
Yeah.
even at the
Yeah.
front end. So so these individuals don't have to mask and
They
act
are.
like
Yeah.
I'm like holding it together all day and I'm masking this. They could be honest about, hey, I need this accommodation.
So it's so wonderful what you're sharing. You said something about executive function. I just try to write that down. Just share that with us again.
Yep. So
Normalize.
executive functions are in our frontal lobe, which is the front part of our brain. It's where all of our organization is. It's where all of our planning, our judgment, our impulse control, our initiation of tasks, basically everything we need to do to get a project done. It pulls on our executive functioning skills.
Thank you.
Our frontal lobe is the last part of our brain to develop in humans. It doesn't fully develop till we are 25.
What?
So that's why we talk about teenagers being impulsive and, oh, when I was 20, I did this dumb thing, that's because your brain isn't fully developed.
So my daughters are still going to do dumb things. Is that what you're telling me? Oh,
I'm just saying, like, normalize the mistakes of young adults. That's what we're still learning from all those things. But if you think about, anyone over the age of 25, if you think back, for some reason, in our culture, we graduate from high school at 18 and graduate from college at 22. You're not fully cooked yet. You've still got, in our early 20s, you're still learning. So you may make decisions that you decide later, oh, that's probably not the thing for me. And that is a really normal thing. So
is that a good reason for me as a dad to say to my girls, don't leave the house until you're 30? No, I'm just kidding.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Because they have to make their own mistakes. And that goes back to, as an aside, not what we're talking about today, but as an aside, teenagers and young adults are going to learn best by trial and error, by making their own mistake. None of us learned the stuff that we really believe in just because someone told us to do it.
Exactly. Now, with our team of trainers, Dr. We have conversations like resilience, psychological safety, all these things. And we know that we speak to clients of ours and they say, hey, teach my team to be resilient. Well, the only way to do that is you have to make mistakes and have hard times, and you've got to go through a hard time to develop that resilience. And the phrase that you're saying here is normalizing the mistakes of young adults. And that for me is really profound, right? To say, hey, it's okay to make the mistake. What is the learning? What is the lesson? What will you do differently next time, right? I mean, if I think about those things, perhaps that should be a focus for maybe. I mean, I'm biased now toward being a parent, right? To my but for me, that's something that I'm reflecting on. I'm now thinking, wow, that's where we learn, right? It's not just from the
it would be really common for a young adult to still be figuring out what they like to do and what is interesting to them and what's motivating for them, and then making mistakes. And where we get down to, people will ask me, how do I know if it's just a mistake or if it's actually a skill weakness, that this thing is hard for me because my brain is not wired? And what that comes down to is a mistake that we then correct is just something we usually make once and then we find a better way. If you find yourself making a mistake, like the example of, I can never remember a 3-step situation or request when someone verbally tells me, but I always can do it if I can reference back in an email. So that's an example of a strategy you're figuring out what works for you and possibly a skill weakness. But absolutely. I mean, I think that normalizing those weaknesses or those mistakes, that is part of figuring out how to, land in the career that you love and that you like and that's motivating to you. And then also normalizing that evolves over time. And that's a cultural thing, right? Our parents 50 years ago picked a career and did it until they retired. And I think, that evolution of it goes along with what we learned from neuroscience of brain development and our interests evolving and our relationships changing over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, Jim, I have a twin brother. Both of us have ADHD and ADD, right? And I was diagnosed as an adult. And I think back to when we were at school, I think my brother, had a lot of frustrations, distracted a lot, but man, he found a gifting with computers, right? And when he found that interest, he just flourished. I'd say he's the smartest one out of all of us, right? But we all have our own strengths. And I think that's what you're saying there is that let's find that. And again, normalizing the mistakes. Is it a mistake or is it a skills weakness? Just love how you're phrasing that. But I go back to our upbringing and I think about, I read a book by Dr. Picton who says, she had a child that was diagnosed, I think with ADHD as well. And she did a lot of research and diet for her, sorted everything. So diet played a role. Then there was routine, there's medication. So I guess I look at how we grew up and my parents are like, you're okay, get it done, we'll rapido, put us in a routine and monitored us and make sure we did the bare minimum or excelled at what we were good at. Then there were individuals that maybe now, if I speak to my parents, they'll say things like, teachers are too quick to want to say, hey, ADHD or ADD, and they want to too quick to put on medication and too quick to this. So there's a mindset and maybe a stigma that maybe is unfair here. And I guess with your experience, I would ask, if I grew up in a world where is it drugs, is it diet, or is it routine, a combination of, how do we get rid of the stigma? What are some of the things that we could maybe do just to create a little more awareness around, hey, man, it's actually okay, Yeah,
so we're finding more and more of how genetic autism and ADHD are within our human populations. And you meet somebody with ADHD and ask about their family. And so it's not necessarily that everybody, had the diagnosis, but they will be able to say, oh yeah, my brother, or oh yeah, my dad, or oh yeah, my aunt, everyone's, because this is all evolving. And I went to high school in the 1990s and ADHD research was booming at that time, and medication research for ADHD was booming, and the pendulum swings back and forth, right? So we've got that, kind of bootstrap mentality of like, oh, you're just not working hard enough. That was kind of like 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe, and even before too. And then we started learning more in the 90s about, okay, so maybe there is actually a skill weakness here that we need to support. Yeah. And that is absolutely true for many students and many people. And I think too, that the pendulum can swing so far that we think, oh, everybody has ADHD. That's not true statistically, but I think it's true that even if a child doesn't reach a diagnostic threshold of being diagnosed with ADHD, for instance, if teachers and parents just stay more open to this skill weakness idea, oh, my child just needs to move a lot. They may not have ADHD, but they are such an active kid. Instead of just saying, oh, you just need to try harder to sit in your seat, let them stand up. Yeah. Just this idea of being more flexible about how our nervous systems exist in classrooms and workplaces in the world. I think that we're probably in a moment where the pendulum swinging back, hopefully to the middle somewhere, where we've got, yes, some people are diagnosed, some people are not, but can we all just embrace the idea that our brains and our nervous systems all need different things to learn and work?
Yeah. And it goes to that self-awareness, right? Taking a genuine interest. And I look at business today with diversity and inclusion, right? And we look at these diverse, how do we include them? How do we get to understand where they're coming from and leverage the strengths they bring to the organization or to the team or to whatever we could leverage them to be, And I think that's such an important thing for us.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your brother and his interest and just taking off when he found that interest. That's the asynchronicity I'm talking about with what if he had not found that interest. Like most of the engagement and joy really that comes from work and is, aligning with our interest. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
a lot of traditional school does not pull that out of kids because school is still very traditional and routine and one size fits all in many aspects. It's getting better in many districts. There are, magnet options and early career high schools and things like that. And so that's getting better, but really thinking outside the box as early as high school of how we can nurture interest, which will increase engagement, which will help everyone figure out, what they want to do.
And then engagement, I mean, just the research that we've done from a corporate point of view, but engagement creates retention, engagement, feel belonging. I contribute more when I feel engaged. So
Yes.
it just makes sense. If we're engaging this young adult or this learner, even in middle school or younger, I would imagine with your experience, if we can get that they take an interest, right? They see someone and we're able to develop even better and quicker, and I guess just feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a self-esteem thing, right? If I'm comfortable with my diagnosis, so to speak, or if I'm comfortable with who I am, and you were saying earlier, I can then communicate, so I accept who I am, what my strengths and my weaknesses are. That's self-awareness, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I can communicate that, and then people also know who I am, right?
Right.
Could you share some insight or tips on how maybe if I was the person in school or middle school that I could actually vocalize this? What are conversations a parent could have with their younger child, maybe, I don't know, K2 or 3 or middle school or whatever? What might some of the things be that I could do as a parent if I want to help them accept it, be aware of it, and just communicate it with others, like their friends, for example?
Yeah. So in my work, I work a lot with parents because the first thing that has to happen is we have to recognize there's a difference. We have to investigate and define what the difference is. And then you're rolling out this information in multiple conversations with your child that in a developmentally appropriate way as needed as they grow up.
Yeah.
And you mentioned your coworker before that, is really open with the school and advocating with the school. I always tell parents, when you communicate with the school in front of your child in elementary school, you are modeling advocacy. You are modeling how to talk about this. If you are bad-mouthing the teacher and saying the system is against us and all those things, your child is going to internalize that is what the system is against me.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful, even at elementary age, of thinking about how we're talking about our culture. And yes, there are negative things going on. There are disability rights issues all over the place and ableism all over the place. But think about your kid and your teacher and your relationships with the community. You're advocating for them right in front of them and teaching them that, so that when they get to middle school, then we're teaching them how to write an email to their teacher. We're teaching them how to speak up and say, I need to be moved up in class because I can't pay attention back here, or little things like that, or teaching them how to speak up for themselves little by little. And then by high school, they're taking the reins of they're emailing the teachers. And many kids I work with do not want to approach somebody in person after class with everybody looking at them. So email is like the greatest thing ever for them, but that's how we work. That's how we function in life too. And so it's okay to lean into how does your kid communicate best, because that's going to be how they communicate well in the workplace and with professors or with, people, anybody teaching a class to them in training or in community college or in high school, and helping them understand themselves is a parallel journey to helping them learn how to communicate what they need. And we've got to work on it all at the same time. Help the teachers understand, help kids understand themselves, help the peers understand, help the coworkers understand, and help parents. It's like, that's why the relationships are so crucial. And the curiosity is so crucial, because the minute that you say, well, what's wrong with that kid? Or what's wrong with that? Why is he doing that? That's going to shut down communication, and you're going to feel judgment. And that completely severs any engagement you got going on because someone doesn't feel included and accepted in that environment. So those are all really important mindsets to have going into all of this.
Yeah, and sometimes we judge our kids by our yardstick and experience, right? So one of the challenges, if a child is genuinely curious and says, why is that, look, a 6-year-old says, why is that child behaving like that? We say, no, you can't say that so loud. Well, we get embarrassed and we shouldn't. We say, hey, that's a good question. It could be X, Y, Z, right? It could be one of these reasons, maybe. And it's just to understand that, right? It creates that self-awareness, or it helps them keep that curiosity instead of withdrawing and saying, oh, I can't say that or can't ask that, right? So
yes, I have this conversation so much with disability advocates. So the minute that we say we are embarrassed by a curious question from our child, we just modeled for our child that it's hush hush, we don't talk about disability. And so what we need to do in that moment is say, you know what, you probably haven't seen a child in a wheelchair, or you probably haven't seen a child flapping their arms like that when they get excited. Now I have the benefit of being able to kind of know what those things are because of my work and explain those things, but you can also say, you know what, I'm not sure what that is, but do you want to go say hi? And we could ask their mom why they move their body that way. So I think it's a scary thing for adults to do, but kids are not scared. They're curious and they want to know more. And the more we can normalize differences on the playground, at the park, the more that is going to evolve over time, and just that curiosity at school and in the workplace.
Yeah, and we got to keep that curiosity, right? We got to keep it going through. I mean, obviously, you're helping so many people, and you're helping your parents, educators, and these young children as well. And I guess they're going to get they're going to get a good break in life, and they're going to learn something and grow from that because of the good work that you're doing. I'm curious, if you think about your growth path and you think about, how you've developed, who was the person that maybe influenced you or gave you that breakthrough so you could find this passion and this calling? If you were to reflect on that, what insights might you be able to share?
Yeah, I always go back to my dissertation advisor, a professor in graduate school, who was one of those people who believed in me before I believed in myself, that type of situation. Like I was checking all the boxes, doing all the things, but she just jumped right in and believed that I could be successful with this and that I had a passion for it kind of before I recognized that I had more of a passion for it than other people. And so I was like, why is she so excited about me? So when people, I remember back, when I would have professors, mainly that one professor where she was so excited about my passion, that's where I felt like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. And I'm showing a little bit more interest or motivation or passion than other students she's worked with. So I think that just leads us into thinking about when we are interacting with younger colleagues or kids right out of, high school, college, graduate school, letting them know when we see a spark, see a spark in their learning or in their motivation, making sure that they know that's special. Because I've seen more people in the field than just you, and you may have only been with your cohort or your, small group of colleagues. And I want you to know that that's special, and we need to pay attention to that.
Love it. That's amazing. I'm sorry that our time is up. I'm like, oh man, this has been so amazing. It's like, oh man. So just for those parents, educators, young adults, that are listening to us today and they want to maybe reach out with, and connect and possibly get in touch, what's the best way to follow you or connect with you? What might that be?
Yeah, you can go to my website at learnwithdremily.com to find parent resources, teacher training resources, and links to my podcast and my Substack, which is where I share most of my information. And then, of course, on social media, I'm Emily W. King, PhD, but you can also just search Learn with Dr. Emily.
Fantastic. We'll have those links for sure in the description. You'll be able to find it there. Dr. Emily, man, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those that are listening, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. And, we want to bring more of these value adds to the communities that we're serving. So thanks for listening in, and thanks again, Dr. Emily.
Thanks for having me.